We all start somewhere, and that's usually with a beginner reptile. But what if I told you the 5 that you're thinking of really aren't that? So today, let's go over the top 5 worst beginner reptiles and the 5 close substitutes you probably never thought of. My name's Adam, this is Diamond, you're watching Wickens Wicked Reptiles, stick around. Okay. The frog chimes in too. I believe that there is no such thing as a beginner reptile. However, I do think that certain species are kind of off the table for most beginners. Most people who have never kept a reptile before shouldn't keep these specific reptiles unless they have someone to train them or have help from an experienced keeper. But if you're just going to a pet store and you want a family pet or a pet for you, these are the 5 that I would not recommend, and there's 5 better ones. That's all I mean by beginner reptile. So let's start it off with number 5, a big lizard, one of my favorites, Tegus. Argentine black and white Tegus are the best Tegu, so if you didn't want to listen to me, which is fine, and you decided I must get a Tegu, make sure it's an Argentine black and white. But if you're thinking about reds or golds or anything like that, it's a definite no for sure. So don't get one of those Tegus, instead get a mini Tegu. And by mini Tegu, I'm talking about jeweled Lacertas. Jeweled Lacertas are some of the most beautiful animals that you'll ever see in terms of lizards. They don't get that big. We're talking about similar size to a bearded dragon, not quite as chunky as these guys. They are slender bodied. I had one for many years. Of course, the one I had was a rescue. It had metabolic bone disease and all these issues. But he did live a long and healthy life after I got him and took good care of him. And that's just a testament to how easy they are in comparison to other lizards. Now, the reason that I say that they are mini Tegus, I don't care. I'm just gonna let them scream, those frogs. They're not from the same part of the world, okay? So jeweled Lacertas are from the Mediterranean, places like Spain, and then Tegus are from South America. So you're not gonna find them in the same area at all. But they look similar tongue, similar head shape. They have similar diets, right? They're an omnivorous type diet. Both of them fall in the camp of some people feed them dog food or cat food. That's not a staple. This is not a care guide in any way. I'm just using that as an example of how similar they are. Similar care requirements, similar humidity, except for a Tegu is this big and a Lacerta is this big. Much smaller, much more reasonable, much more manageable. Get out, Nelly. Nelly, out. Get out. Okay. Oh, I'm a dog fosterer now. I foster dogs. That's Nelly. Number 4, we're talking about the biggest gecko in the world. We're talking about Lucianos geckos. Now, Lucianos geckos are from a place called New Caledonia, way over here in the middle of nowhere in the world. The really cool thing is we didn't really know about most of the geckos on this island for a long time. And the one that I'm going to recommend you to get instead, we thought was extinct until 1994. I'm talking about crested geckos. Yes, crested geckos are easy, obviously, and they're very common. So if you don't want a crested gecko, I really do think a gargoyle gecko or a Chihuahua gecko or even a Sarah would be better for you. But crested geckos, in my opinion, are the quintessential best beginner reptile, in my opinion, period, bar none, the easiest reptile to keep, in my opinion. Now, there are very many similarities. Lucianos geckos do eat a powdered diet, although I do recommend feeding a lot more insects than you'd feed with a crested gecko. The difference is the Lucianos gecko is freaking huge, generally way less handleable. They're way more expensive, which shouldn't be a factor. I mean, if you're gonna buy a $2,000 gecko, which is kind of what they are sometimes, who cares, because it's the setup that's gonna get you in the upkeep, although they're really not that expensive to set up. But either way, it's a very similar setup. Of course, Lucianos geckos coming from the same island of New Caledonia, very similar ranges, some even overlapping. So they're gonna have almost the same care requirements, almost the same, but Lucianos geckos growl at you. They're kind of known for being cantankerous. Their bites really suck. They're known for crapping all over the glass, making the upkeep much more unmanageable. Where with crested geckos, I mean, they've got the sticky toe pads too, so they can crap on the glass and you're gonna have issues, you have to clean the glass all the time. But it's a smaller animal, smaller poops, less of it, and they're more inclined, in my experience, to poop off the edge of the fixtures of the enclosure rather than on the glass. So if you have a cleanup crew, right, it's a bioactive, makes your life a lot easier. Cleanup crew isn't gonna clean the poop off of the glass. You're the poop cleaner. Aside from the fact that crested geckos are smaller, they don't growl at you, they're less inclined to bite, and they're way cheaper, depending on the morph, of course, they're pretty much not, I don't want to say the same, I know that because the purists are going to be after me, but they're really similar. But let's move on to number 3. But before we do, I'm not trying to say that any of these reptiles stink, and something that really doesn't stink is me, because of today's sponsor, Scentbird. My favorite thing about Scentbird is I don't have to buy a $500 bottle, $300, whatever it is, to figure out if I like that scent. Because when you go to the store and they spray it on the card, you might not actually like that scent if you're not wearing it. So you get samples every single month for $17. They come in packaging like this, which is actually freaking fantastic because it locks, it's easy, it looks nice, and you always know what scent you're about to put on. More or less, you go to the website, you talk about the fragrance notes that you like, coffee, vanilla, cinnamon, whatever it is that you like, and they're gonna send you something that matches your personality. Because every day when I leave the house, wallet, keys, scent. I don't go out smelling bad, and Scentbird helps me with that. The one I got that I really like this month, Sweet Taboo Chris Collins. This one is unreal. Vanilla and cinnamon together is always a banger, but then with the coffee and geranium too, this is the one that I get complimented on when I go out. And we're talking about premium brands that come in this packaging. Prada, Gucci, Versace. And then we've got indie brands as well. Skylar, Heretic, Confessions of a Rebel. The list goes on, but the great news is every month you can get something new and you can try it. Use my code WWR for 55% off Scentbird. Just a little over $7 for your first month, and they ship to US and up here in Canada too. This month I got fragrances by Sanctuary, Sweet Taboo, and Mind Games was one that I really liked. So go to the link below, use code WWR for 55% off. Number 2. I'm gonna ruin it with an amphibian and one you've never heard of. I'm talking about fringed leaf frogs, or Crusiohyla. Generally in the pet trade, Crusiohyla craspidopus is much more common than the Crusiohyla sylviae, which is what you're seeing here, that I actually found a wild one in Costa Rica a few years ago. Video right here. Super cool. I love making videos about travel, even though you don't watch them for some reason. Hello, darkness, my old friend. Now, fringed leaf frogs are notoriously difficult to keep in captivity. Now, there are some really great examples of people who keep them really well. Troy Goldberg, Mike Titula, Dion from Reptiliatus. There are so many people who keep them really well. However, they are known to be very difficult to keep alive. This is a frog that is not cheap. It's a big frog. It's maybe the most beautiful tree frog in the whole world. Those frogs are dart frogs, and they are wild. And they're a big tree frog, and they can be cohabbed, and they're overall, fringed leaf frogs might be my favorite. Well, actually, I think the waxy monkey tree frogs are my favorite. But anyway, what I think would be a much better substitute of similar size, but much easier to care for, easier to keep alive, dumpy tree frogs, or White's tree frogs, or Australian tree frogs, whatever you want to call them. This is one of the biggest tree frogs in the world. They're big, they have a nice call, but it's not too annoying. They're easy to keep. I mean, basically, they don't really need much. You put them in an enclosure that is humid, give them some sort of water, give them things to climb on and hide behind, give them a cleanup crew to clean up the poop, and then feed them bugs. That's pretty much it. It is one of the easiest animals that I have to keep. I have 4 of them. They are in the same enclosure. They're getting a really cool upgrade. I can't wait to make, I'm already in the process. I can't wait to show you. It's going to be my best, biggest, most beautiful enclosure ever. Either way, I think that because they are so fun to feed, they're maybe one of the best frogs to keep because they're not boring. Don't get me wrong. During the day, they're a nocturnal frog, so they sleep during the day, but they sleep out in the open a lot of the times. They don't hide. So even during the day when they're not moving around, they're still visible in the enclosure. And then at night, they are not the brightest or most graceful. In fact, they're pretty clumsy. So they're kind of jumping all over the place and you can hear them. And it's really funny to watch. And then when they eat, again, they are... Get out. It's not your turn yet. Next week, there's a video about you. They're jumping around, and when you feed them, I think that it's more fun because they will dive after crickets and roaches and worms, and a lot of the times they miss, and sometimes they'll grab onto your finger if you let that happen to you, but they don't really have visible teeth. Like the teeth are, it's like sandpaper. And if I had to suggest a tree frog for anybody that's big, that's not a red-eyed tree frog, I would say for sure a dumpy tree frog is for you. And number 1 worst beginner reptile, Mandarin rat snakes. Okay, I love Mandarin rat snakes. They're one of the most beautiful non-venomous snakes on earth, maybe the most. It's an animal that I would love to keep and had the opportunity to buy a few years ago at an expo. It's what you're seeing here. I still to this day regret not buying that snake. And it's because, the reason that I didn't buy it is because I didn't have a place for it, because Mandarin rat snakes like temperatures very cool. My reptile room gets too warm for these. Now, of course, that was when I lived at the old house, and I didn't have the know-how and resources to make a reptile room that would be fitting so that I could have pythons on this side, things that are warm, and then things like dart frogs on this side. It works out. This room isn't that big, right? You can see, this isn't a green screen, by the way. People, I don't know why people, like, I can touch this stuff. But either way, I didn't have that. The room that I had back then was maybe a quarter this size. It got really warm. I didn't have anywhere else to put this snake. And the reason that I think that they're a bad snake for beginners is just simply because they need it too cool for most people. They need it cool and humid. It's just too much for most people, especially if you already have reptiles. So instead, what you should get is a corn snake. I know it's boring, but just get one. And I don't actually think it's boring, but I know people think that. Just get one that maybe is a unique morph. There are some that look very yellow, or even a milk snake, because milk snakes, although they're red and orange most of the time, they look more similar. So I would say get a different colubrid that you can bring it up to temperature a little bit higher, that isn't going to die if you get it above 80 degrees, like a Mandarin rat snake. And they're just more common, they're cheaper, easier to find, they're gonna feed better, they're better for handling, they're not as shy. Because that's the other thing with Mandarin rat snakes. If you're a beginner, you probably want something that's going to be visible, right? That's why I kind of hammered on the dumpy tree frogs being visible most of the time. If you have an animal and you're a beginner, that probably means you don't have that many. For me, I don't care that my Chinese cave gecko is always hiding, because I have a bunch of leopard geckos and I have like all these other animals that are out all the time. But if you don't have that, you want something you can see. Corn snakes generally are cruising around the enclosure even during the day. So you're gonna see them more often, and for all the other reasons that I mentioned. But either way, I think that is a better option. And I wanna know what you think below. What are the worst and best beginner reptiles? Let me know in the comment section. And as always, thank you for hitting like and subscribe. It helps this channel more than you could ever know. And a special thanks to the Patreon supporters. You guys are freaking amazing. I'm so excited to be able to share more on that platform. Of course, there are tiers where you get free shirts, discounts on merch, you get to have one-on-one meetings with me, all that for as little as $1 or more. And that's it. Because I do videos on Mondays and Thursdays. That means I'll see you in the next one.